Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Greatest Games on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me, of course, as ever, is Jonathan Wilson. And with us today is Priya Ramesh, football writer who specialises in Dutch football, contributor to The Guardian, the Blizzard, 442, just to name a few, and a self-described subpar Sunday League midfielder. Priya, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Pleasure to be on.
Now, today we go back to May 1995, more specifically to Vienna, on the 24th of the month for the Champions League final, which finished Ajax 1, AC Milan 0. Priya, why have you chosen this game?
I think for me, it's one of those games where you saw the culmination of what Van Gaal had been doing, but it was also kind of the sort of point of inception from which I think a lot of elements of modern football have been derived from that Ajax team. Van Gaal himself obviously took it to Barcelona and everywhere he went, but then you could then see elements of his style of that Ajax team in, say, sort of Pep Guardiola's Barcelona team, for example. And there's definitely things that he introduced and details that he really pressed on that team that has percolated through modern European football. And of course, it's the last time Ajax won the Champions League. It's pretty iconic. They won it after a gap of 22 years as well. And it was a season I think none of them expected, no one expected, including the team themselves, but finished in the most beautiful way possible.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose iconic is the word, Jonathan. I mean, you think of that Ajax side, you think of that marvellous kit, which for those who have seen our output on our socials will see Priya wearing it. But also, the names in that Ajax side as well, went on to great things. I mean, what when you think of this Ajax side, Jonathan, what immediately leaps to mind?
Well, I think it's, Priya's absolutely right. The ideas percolate out from here. A lot of the players percolate out from here. But in some ways, it's the end of an era as well. That this really is the last homegrown team to win the European Cup or win the Champions League. Of the 13 players who got on the pitch that day, 8 had been produced by Ajax. I think there's only 2 players over the age of 25, and the average length of time they've been at the club was 8 years.
So could you argue that Barcelona, though, years later, some of their players? I mean, obviously not all homegrown, but there's.
Yeah, I think the squad in 2009 had 7 home-produced players. So okay, you could make that argument, but it's still not to the same extent. They'd still bought players for huge amounts of money. I mean, they had Thierry Henry in that side. There's no Thierry Henry equivalent here. So the idea that a club didn't have to spend a huge amount of money, it could just produce its own talent, and it could achieve this level. I think this really is the end for this. Now, I mean, Ajax could have done it, of course, 2 seasons ago, and lost in the semi-final. But then immediately the vultures sort of descend and pick off the prime assets, which did sort of happen with this team as well. But at least they had one more year. They got to the final the following season. So yeah, it sort of feels like a team that straddles 2 eras. It's sort of the end of the old era and the beginning of the new.
Yeah, a very pivotal time, as you say. I mean, Priya, what is it about this Ajax side, and I suppose Dutch football in general, that makes you so curious and so interested in it?
I think it's partly on my part. I wanted them to just get a bit more recognition, because with Bayern winning the Champions League last season, there was all this talk about them winning all their games, and you talk about all the greatest sides who have played in the Champions League and won the Champions League, but it is actually very rarely that Ajax 94-95 are mentioned in that category. They're sort of mentioned in this, what a surprise, such a young team, great football, all of that. But they were genuinely, statistically, one of the best teams ever. I mean, they went 48 games unbeaten, I think. They won the league unbeaten and the Champions League unbeaten, which is remarkable. They scored they scored 134 goals that season in all competitions, only conceded 35. So that gives them a goal difference of 99, which is absolutely ridiculous. And you think about that team, and as Jonathan rightly said, they only really had Frank Rijkaard and Danny Blind, who were slightly the veterans in that side. And all of the others were in their first few years of playing, had maybe someone like Frank de Boer, Ronald de Boer maybe had 5 years, 6 years under their belt as professionals. But the average age of that squad was, I could be wrong by a bit, but I'm pretty sure it was under something like 23 years. And it's remarkable that, it's testament to the work Van Gaal did with that young squad. But it is also just without any of that qualifying factors, they are simply one of the greatest Champions League teams. And I don't think they get that recognition.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the average ages, of course, a teenage Noam Wakano would have brought down the average for once in that situation. But Jonathan, I mean, with Ajax, do you think with Dutch football, because when you talk about this Ajax side, the statistics are absolutely remarkable. And when we talk about other great sides, and your allegiances are quite obvious here, Priya, I appreciate that. So forgive me for bringing in PSV Eindhoven for a moment. But the treble they did in the late 80s, Jonathan, in 1988, again, is way overlooked in football history. Do you think when it gets to the kind of Dutch club football, sometimes it can be overlooked because we think about the philosophies and the theories and obviously the individuals who go abroad, but there's plenty going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think PSV in '88 is hopefully you can do a podcast on that sometime, because I think that's an amazing stuff. Given they barely won a game, I think they only won 3 games in the whole of that campaign. So that's maybe one of the reasons why that doesn't get remembered. They just kept drawing 0-0 winning on penalties. But I think the other thing about this side, and I think something we overlook with Van Gaal, and we've been guilty of it as well. We talk about Van Gaal plenty of times in this podcast, and there's a certain angle that we tend to take, which is not wrong, but the Van Gaal who takes over Ajax in '91, he replaces Leo Beenhakker. The job he does, he basically dismantles a team while winning the UEFA Cup with it, and puts it back together again while losing his wife to cancer and losing his faith. And I think that losing his faith is a thing that is wildly overlooked. He was a pretty devout Catholic, and his wife got cancer and died the previous season, and he was sort of nursing her through while leading a team to the league title. And that, I think, is an extraordinary sort of emotional story, which we sort of forget a bit with Van Gaal. That kind of there's a very vulnerable side there beneath the sort of the thick skin. And then this team is sort of the flowering of what he put together the previous year. And Priya's quite right. They win the league unbeaten to... They beat Milan twice in the group stage as well. They beat them 2-0 home and away in the group stage. Yeah. So it wasn't... the final was a bit of a scruffy game and they were a little bit fortunate to win it. But they had the bet with Milan in those 2 group matches as well. So I just sort of think the whole story of Ajax in the early 90s is slightly underplayed. And the beating Torino in that UEFA Cup final. So they drew 2-2 in Turin. It was 2-legged in those days. So they drew 2-2 in Turin. Went back to Amsterdam. Dennis Bergkamp was ill, so couldn't play. Stefan Pedersen, the centre forward, broke his collarbone and played on with a broken collarbone. And so they're doing it in incredibly difficult circumstances. And the other fact that I just find amazing is just how different football was 28 years ago. Van Gaal's preparation for the first leg was ruined because he had one tape of Milan and his daughter taped over it with a Dutch soap opera.
My goodness.
And they still won it.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine what they'd have done if she hadn't done that. Yeah, I mean, Ajax, I think you're absolutely right, John. The Ajax of the 90s are an extraordinary side. Going into this Champions League, in the group stages, they play AC Milan twice, and that game in Amsterdam, Priya, you watch the highlights even, just they're very dominant. And this Milan side, it's Capello's Milan, the players that they have, they roll off the tongue, and we'll go into more detail in the second half. But this Ajax side were playing without fear. They were extraordinary, had that youthful exuberance, and didn't seem to kind of respect any opponent in a good sense of the word, if you see what I mean, whoever they played.
I think, 100%. And I think you could see that for Van Gaal, when he came in, it was not like a 1-year fix. He won a lot on the way. He built it up very steadily. So they won the UEFA Cup, then they won the KNVB Beker the next year, and then they won the Eredivisie, qualified for the Champions League. And it's also not to underestimate. This was the first year that they qualified for the European Cup of the Champions League in 9 years. So I think only Danny Blind had previous experience in Europe, in Champions League, sorry. Frank de Boer had obviously played with in the UEFA Cup. And then they had Frank Rijkaard. Like, most of these players were teenagers or even younger the last time Ajax were even in the Champions League. But I think that actually played to Van Gaal's strength, because obviously his background, very much like Reiners Michel's, was as a school teacher. He was a PE teacher, and then instead of sort of starting off a slightly smaller club, he then became the coach in the Ajax youth system, became Beenhaker's assistant, and then got the job. But I think it played to his strengths, because he was used to sort of working with children, basically, and because he'd worked in the youth teams at Ajax, he knew most of these players that he was working with. They played with him for years and years, so they took to his methods very easily. They were molded in his vision, really. And he did mention about how the squad he'd inherited wasn't his, and it was Beenhaker's and all that, but he replaced Beenhaker's squad by sort of creating his own, really, from the youth system. They kind of supplemented it with the scouting and a few players, but it's also not to forget that Van Gaal didn't get most of the players he wanted. So, for example, at right back, he just couldn't really fix the puzzle, and Sonny Saloy was getting on a bit, and he wanted a right back, and on the sort of eve of the 94-95 season, he had 2 names on his list. Both of these players were loanees to FC Groningen the season before. It was Michael Reisiger, who was then an attacking midfielder, like a right midfielder, right winger sort of position, and Clyde Weinhard, who was a striker. So he was very peculiar in that he could pick up on these qualities that players had, and then fit them into different positions within his system, and it worked. And the other thing is, I think, because they were so young and so malleable, they really looked up to Van Gaal as a bit of a father figure, and he did really bring the squad together. He had his issues, obviously. He's not an easy guy to get along with, but for example, Mark Overmars mentions that when his wife passed away in, I think it was January 94. It didn't just hit Van Gaal, it hit the squad like a bomb. It was, all the players were absolutely inconsolable. And the day after the funeral, they were all sitting in the dressing room, and they weren't sure if Van Gaal would turn up, and that would be fair enough, that would be perfectly valid given the circumstances. And then they see through the parking lot, and they see his Opel Omega coming through the gates, and that made such an impression on them that they were a family, and everyone was in this together. And, it was also the fact that Van Gaal, for all of his sort of, as Jonathan said, we kind of like to think of him as this aloof character, but also used to organise games nights for not just the players, but their wives, with his own wife. And he's got a very sort of soft centre to all of that sort of thick-skinned, arrogant personality that he has. And yeah, as you mentioned, the first AC Milan game, I think it was Danny Blind maybe that said that AC Milan, basically, I think it was Van der Sar actually, AC Milan only arrived in Amsterdam on the day of the game. So, because most teams arrive a day earlier, train at the ground, so on. But they kind of thought, oh, we're champions, they kind of underestimated Ajax almost. And they turned up and were completely taken aback. And apparently, I think Ronald de Boer said that Van Gaal said before that first game that they're good, but we're better. And all the players were like, if it's a draw, maybe, we can talk about we got lucky and all of that. But Van Gaal just sort of like radiated this confidence. And he does this very often. He does this throughout the season, where even if he has his doubts, he just says the most confident things. And that does sort of have an effect on the squad. It kind of inspires them as a young player to think, he knows more than me. He's done his homework. Maybe if he thinks we can win it, we can win it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say about it. Does, Jonathan, it does feel like it's almost like an under-21 side, in a sense, a real youthful team with a couple of older heads in there.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the key point is they have to do it his way. There's no room for any debate there. And so I think the whole incident with Brian Roy back in '92 sort of really sort of sums that up. That Brian Roy was sort of the darling of the fans. Yeah, obviously a hugely talented player, but Van Gaal sort of didn't think he was tactically intelligent enough. He didn't understand football, and so the line he came out with, and this is such a great Van Gaal line. The supporters have always adored Brian because in the Netherlands the emphasis on kicking the ball around nicely and not on all the other disciplines that I find equally important. But this then I think is really significant with the fact it's Milan. That the previous year we'd seen them beat Barcelona, beat Cruyff's Barcelona in the European Cup final, in the Champions League final, and hammer them, beat them 4-0. And there'd been this sort of doctrinal dispute between Van Gaal and Cruyff, and various personalities as well, where Cruyff and all the Cruyff loyalists had sort of felt that Van Gaal was too rigid, too cautious in how he played. Very risk averse. He didn't like his winger to take on the fullback. If it was more than one player in front of a winger, he liked the winger to turn back, keep possession, don't take risks. And Van Gaal's point is, look, my way works. You lost 4-0. I've beaten them 2-0, 2-0, 1-0. And he's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And no doubt would have made sure everybody knew that he was right as well. Before we go to a break, I mean, Jonathan, that point that as you mentioned, they had to do it his way, but it was a very young side though, as well. Do you think that is a number of reasons, and you've mentioned, I think quite rightly, that a manager, like some players, only has a certain amount of time at the top of at the top of the tree, if you like. Do you think that's one of the big reasons why this is probably the greatest sort of period in Van Gaal's managerial career? You could argue is that he had all these young lads who really did what he wanted, and as Priya said, was a part of this family essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something you see with various coaches, that they almost, because their ideas are so idiosyncratic, and because they're so dogmatic in the imposition of them, they need either complete loyalists, as Danny Blind and Frank Rijkaard were, or they need kids who just don't know any different and just think this is right. So I think you see it even with, they're very, very different personalities to Van Gaal, but Mircea Lucescu is exactly the same. All his best results come with kids, because kids just sort of go, oh, well, if Mircea says it, we'll do it. Whereas older players are, oh, hang on, this isn't what we used to do. And so, I think one of the most fascinating, it's a very brief period, but Lucescu's time at Inter, when he wins 5 games in a row, scoring 20-odd goals in those 5 games, when he's got a load of first teamers out injured, he's playing the kids, and then the senior players come back and they just don't listen to him, form falls off. And that's sort of a microcosm of a particular type of manager. Van Gaal's that type of manager. I think even you can say something like Don Revie. He had to have a team that he'd built, and then he couldn't replace anybody in it. I almost wonder whether one of Guardiola's problems at Barcelona was, once he tried to bring players in to supplement the kids he brought through, when he tries to bring in Zlatan and Shagrinsky, and even David Villa struggled for a while to settle. They almost need these ultra loyal players, whether they're loyal because they share a philosophy or because they're very young and just sort of go along with it.
Yeah. All right, let's have a quick break, and after that we'll talk about the match itself. See you in a moment. Welcome back to the Greatest Games on the Blizzard, everybody. Now then, Priya, let's talk Turkey, as they say. So Ajax, as we mentioned, they'd beaten Milan twice in the group stages. They advanced through the competition with some impressive results, most notably the second leg against Bayern at home in the semi-final. They beat them 5-2, and they again were playing with that kind of youthful exuberance. And so on. So when the final comes around, they are playing this great AC Milan side, who are the champions of Europe and have been there and done it. What were Ajax thinking then? Were they thinking, well, hang on, we've beaten this side twice? Or were they a bit like, oh, hang on a minute, it's these guys and it's the final and it's their stage, not ours?
Definitely more the latter, I think. I think Reisiger captures it beautifully when he says he was in his hotel room before the day before the final, and he just couldn't sleep because the thing that was racing through his mind was, we've beaten them once, okay, we've beaten them twice, maybe we got a bit lucky. Like, can we actually do it a third time? Like, is that just one step too far? Like, it would be frankly ridiculous that a side that hasn't been in the Champions League for 9 years and is filled with all these kids can beat the reigning champions of Europe, who'd absolutely thrashed Barcelona 4-0. Can they beat them like 3 times? And they hadn't conceded the last 2. It's almost like you're kind of delaying the inevitable. Like, you kind of, okay, we've kept them once, we kept them twice. This time they're really going to come at us with a bit of a vengeance. And it was echoed by players like Ronald de Boer as well, saying that third time is a bit like you're kind of bordering on pulling off something that's absolutely ridiculous there. But it was interesting because I think Van Gaal kind of internalized that, and he tried to sort of do a sort of mind game tactic that you can kind of like trace where Mourinho got his streak from. But so on the eve of the final, UEFA basically announced that from the following season, the seeding for the group stages is not going to be based on the club's individual performances in Europe. It's going to be based on the country's coefficient. So that's where the coefficient system comes from. And Van Gaal takes this as a sort of personal affront, even though his club haven't been in the Champions League for 9 years, and like they won the UEFA Cup, and they have generally done well. But he takes this as this great sort of personal insult, and then he uses that to then inspire the players, being like, there's loads of Italians on the UEFA committees. This is obviously like them trying to get to us. We've got to go out there and prove that, we can win this despite all the odds being against us. It's the world against us. Do you really want to be back training in a few weeks for the preliminary round for next season? And I find that quite interesting, that he kind of manages to take that and then just spin it into something completely bigger than it is.
That's the Van Gaal I know.
It is absolutely, and you can absolutely see where someone like Mourinho gets that from, that whole sort of world against us mentality that you then use to kind of inspire your players and hype them up for the big occasion.
Yeah, it does sound very much like Van Gaal. Jonathan, can we turn our attention to Milan for a moment here? Because we've mentioned that they were European champions. Of course, they finished, I think, 4th in Serie A that season, so not a great time domestically. But they were in the final. They just sort of scraped through in second place in that group. Casino Salzburg were now RB, of course, with Ralph Hasenhüttl on their books, ran them close. But Milan, they get to the final, and I mean the players that they have in that side, Panucci, Maldini, Albertini, Costacurta, Baresi, Donadoni, Desai, Massara, Boban, Simeone, and Rossi in goal. They roll off the tongue. I mean, this is a classic Milan side, you could say. Capello in charge. They would have been confident, surely, going into this.
Well, except they lost to them twice. I mean, the group stage, they end up finishing level on points with Casino Salzburg because they were docked 2 points for crowd trouble. So I think it wasn't quite as close as
Okay.
I mean, it was close
right,
because they,
I should have said, yeah.
But the crowd trouble made it closer than it needed to be. But I mean, if you've lost twice to a team in the season, of course you're going to be anxious of them. I think there's a recognition that Van Gaal had done something pretty special. And that team, it's the classic back four, but they're starting to age.
But do you think this is why in this game, obviously Ajax still win it and Ajax still keep a clean sheet, but you said it was more of a scrap, it was more of a bit of a turgid
I mean, it wasn't a good game at all.
No, it wasn't. I mean, even the winning goal. But again, we come on to that.
I don't know.
Do you think...
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll come to
that. No, okay. Yeah. But do you think Capello really tried to bring it down to the trenches then? Because he have Ajax gone on and on about their sort of energy and youthfulness and so on. They have the experienced pros, the winners in that side. Surely his mindset would have been right. Let's try and spoil this.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the previous year was a sort of template that he sort of thought we can out physical them, if that's a verb, which is not. Yeah. But they can just sort of
out muscle them.
Yeah, out muscle them. That's the verb I'm looking for. and it worked so well the previous year. And the team's not that dissimilar. I mean, there's no Savicevic obviously, but apart from that, it's pretty much the same. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to know whether his thought was these previous 2 defeats have been a bit freakish. Surely a third time we'll get away with it, or whether he really did think, they've got our number.
Yeah, I mean the Ajax side, Priya. I mean, again, if you talk about the Milan side, the names rolled off the tongue then because they were established players. But now you look at that side: Van der Sar in goal, Reisiger, Blind, Rijkaard, De Boer, Seedorf, Fanini, George, Davids, Ronald De Boer, Jari Litmanen, and Mark Overmars. I mean, absolutely incredible. Carnu and Kluivert on the bench. Winston Bogarde, when he was interested in football, was on the bench as well. It's a phenomenal team. Absolutely phenomenal side. We've mentioned him already, but the importance of Frank Rijkaard to this system is, can't be overstated. Where you have the speed and the skill of some of the youngsters, Rijkaard's position in this team, Priya, in that sort of defence, moving up into midfield, the intelligence, the spatial awareness, the tactical flexibility, he was crucial for Van Gaal, wasn't he?
Oh, 100%. And I think Van Gaal has acknowledged it himself that the most sort of important...
High praise indeed.
if he's admitted something.
Yeah.
But he has said that the most important decision he made that season, or just the season before, was to move Van Gaal into that sort of... He calls it the number 4 position. So that's the sort of libero who's just sort of in front of the defence, can push up into midfield and then drop back when needed. And he said that's the most crucial thing, because when Rijkaard came back to Ajax, he mostly played on the right for a whole season. He played sort of right midfield, kind of right wing, for a whole season. And it was okay, but he just didn't feel at home. And I think, so Rijkaard is very much a man of few words. He doesn't really speak up. I think Danny Blind mentioned that while he was the captain and he was sort of the vocal leader, Rijkaard was very much the silent leader who just spoke through his actions. And when he said something, when he like stopped the ball and like gave instructions on the field, you listened. And moving him into that position, it came at the cost of John van der Brom, who was at AZ a few years ago as a manager. And it really clicked between Blind and Rijkaard, because both of them had that ability to almost work a bit like a pulley. So one of them went, the other one dropped back. It was mostly Rijkaard who pushed up, because obviously he'd played in midfield for a long part of his career. But he really brought a sense of calm, a sense of gravitas to that midfield, which had, he had Seedorf and Davids in front of him, these 2 young Amsterdam guys through and through who'd like grown up playing together. And they had the energy, they had the dynamism, they had the technique. But Rijkaard brought the sense of solidity, not only to midfield, but to the defence as well. And I genuinely think no player, and I mean, this is obviously my personal opinion, no player has finished their career better than Rijkaard. I mean, going back to your childhood club, inspiring a team that much, and then, winning the Champions League, providing the assist. And as Jonathan mentioned, actually, the tactics that Capello went with, I thought it was a bit like they were trying to narrow the midfield. The Milan were trying to sort of pack the midfield so that people like Rijkaard and Seedorf and Davids wouldn't really have time on the ball. So at half-time, Van Gaal actually gets Rijkaard to drop slightly deeper, just so that he gets more time on the ball, so he makes more time for himself. And then he gets he puts Carnu on to kind of push up forward. So you kind of expanding the field of play by sort of moving your own team around. And it works, because Rijkaard eventually sort of makes the winning goal, and I think that's just beautiful. But I think I just want to mention one more thing. I did mention that Rijkaard is a man of few words and doesn't really speak much, but the one thing that all of the players in that team mention is that at halftime, apparently there was a bit of an argument between the De Boer twins and Seedorf about how they should be playing on the right side. And Frank Rijkaard steps up and he speaks up for pretty much essentially like the first time that season, in front of the whole team, speaks up at halftime and basically emphasizes and presses on them that this is now or never. If you lose a Champions League final and you didn't give it your everything, you will never forget it and you will never forgive yourself. So if you're going to lose it, you have to give it yourself. You have to give it all.
Mm-hmm.
And he, just the fact that this man who doesn't speak a lot, but is always there, is always, you know, there for the younger players, always there providing a sense of calm. The minute he speaks up, everyone listens. And then obviously Van Gaal had his things to add on at halftime, but it is Rijkaard's halftime speech that really presses on to these young sort of Ajax players who might, you know, it is a big occasion. It really puts it onto them that they should be going into this and going back out onto the field looking to win it and giving it all they have.
Well, I think the Rijkaard's importance. I mean, I spoke to Van Gaal 4 years ago now, and this is something he was talking about this game specifically, and he said that his doubt about what Cruyff did and playing the sort of the diamond in midfield, so 3 at the back, a diamond midfield, 3 up front. His problem with that was he felt it was very easy. You know, basically the base of a diamond becomes such a focal point and so essential to your creativity that the opposition can just put a man on him, and one simple switch can totally throw you. So he preferred to have 2 more physical players as his 2 centre backs, but they needed a technical quality where one or ideally both, and in this case both, were capable of stepping forward. Now Rijkaard clearly stepped forward more than Blind, but they could both do it. So Rijkaard's a perfect player for him. He is both a centre back and a holding midfielder. He's as a passer of the ball, he's as good as anybody, and he's got a tactical intelligence. So Rijkaard's importance to this team, I think, really can't be. I mean, from a psychological point of view, as a leader, absolutely, but also tactically, absolutely essential.
Yeah, a fascinating career. We were often kind of fixated on his managerial career, Jonathan. It was nice to be able to talk about him as a player, and I didn't know that about him having that half-time team talk.
But I mean, the thing with Seedorf is fascinating as well, because if you watch the second half, and every time you see Van Gaal, he's arguing with Seedorf. He takes Seedorf off 8 minutes in the second half, I think, to bring Kanu on. And him and Seedorf are going at it on the bench constantly. Lads, it's a Champions League final. This can wait.
The scene is so typically
Dutch team, Jonathan. They're a Dutch team. It happens.
It's very Seedorf, isn't it? Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Presumably, Frank Rijkaard sorted it out by just sort of spitting on one of them or something like that. I don't know.
No, but so this is the actual thing, is that everyone thinks he's this thug because of that incident, but Rijkaard is genuinely, no one who's played with him has a bad thing to say about him. I mean, there's footage of Capello in the tunnel before the first game they played against Milan, and he looks at Rijkaard with these eyes, because he also didn't want to let Rijkaard go. Rijkaard came back of his own volition. If it was up to Capello, he would have had Rijkaard there for a few more years. But I completely agree with Jonathan. I think it was interesting that Van Gaal also refers to his playmakers in his team as his centre backs. He calls Blind and Rijkaard his playmakers, and it's interesting because then you've got Lippmannen, obviously, but Lippmannen was always more of a sort of shadow striker rather than a playmaker. And I think that really kind of underlines the role that Rijkaard had in this team.
I mean, Lippmannen was vital for the way he led the press as well. I mean, Van Gaal loves Lippmannen, quite rightly. I mean, the thing about Seedorf, I mean, I think in a very vocal Dutch generation, shall we say, he's perhaps the most vocal. There's that lovely Simon Cooper line about him, where Cooper says that for years he sort of thought Seedorf was just argumentative and annoying. And then, I don't know if he interviewed him or got to know him somehow, but he suddenly had this realisation that Seedorf thinks he's trying to help. It's not Seedorf being annoying for the sake of being annoying. It's Seedorf being annoying because he genuinely thinks he understands the game better than anybody else.
I think that's the problem with the Netherlands. They all think they understand it more.
Well, it's sort of God's great joke, isn't it? He creates this nation of 6'4" giants, who can all speak 15 languages, but put 2 of them in the room and they'll be fighting within 5 minutes.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. The match itself, under the lights in Vienna. I mean, Jonathan, I have to sort of agree with Priya, is right. It wasn't a free-flowing sort of particularly beautiful spectacle. Well, the spectacle was, but the actual game, it wasn't. It wasn't a particularly enjoyable one. I mean, in the first half, I can't remember too many.
Well, I think Milan probably have a better the game. Certainly, first half. I mean, there's the Panucci has a chance which is deflected just over. There's the Simone volley, which Van der Sar saves. Which Van der Sar's a little bit lucky that the volley's straight at him. It was a great volley because just to strike the ball on target is a that's all you could realistically hope to do, and he catches it very sweetly. But it is straight at Van der Sar, and a yard either side is probably going to go in. So yeah, 2 chances in the first half, both to Milan, and then even in the second half, there seems to be a lot of chances which are Simone turning 30 yards from goal and having a speculative shot which goes nowhere near the goal. Mazzaro goes quite close with a turn 20, 25 yards from goal and shoots just wide. But it's only really the last sort of 10, 15 minutes when I apply any pressure at all.
Well, I find that interesting because it goes back to my earlier point that Capello thought, right, you think you're going to beat us 3 times in a row? No chance, right? We're going to do our work on you. We're going to take it down to the trenches, close you down, blah 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 blah. And I don't think it's that huge a coincidence. I mean, Milan made their first sub on the 84th minute. And then another one sort of soon after, and of course that was around the time that the Ajax scored. Seedorf's taken off, as you say, on 53 for Kanu. So Van Halsey's sort of feeling out the game, but on 17 minutes, a young lad, not a little lad, I should say, Patrick Kluivert comes on. Priya, we haven't actually mentioned him yet. He's obviously scores the winning goal. But this was when he sort of announced himself to the wider world, I suppose, in an age pre-internet and so on and so forth.
I was gonna call you out there because I think until that point he was Ajax's second highest scorer that season. And I think just going back a bit, I think one of the reasons that the Ajax sort of pressed in work as well is because Litmanen wasn't 100% for the game. And it's quite funny because it's not like he was carrying an injury. He just had a really, really bad bout of hay fever the week before, and he hadn't trained with the team for a week. So he came into this game kind of not really 100%, and it really wasn't his night. And kind of we've seen what Litmanen can do. The game against Bayern was, there's this amazing shot of Van Gaal looking at the camera to the side after Litmanen scores and saying "ongelooflijk," which is unbelievable. And so then Kluivert comes in, but I think the funny kind of backstory with Kluivert is that at the start of the season, so kind of, the background to this is that we all know PSV eventually got Ronaldo, who had that amazing, absolutely crazy season. And a lot of people still think he's the best player who's ever played in the Eredivisie. But Ajax actually kind of got there first in that they made contact with him first. They tried to sign him, but PSV had, because they were owned by Philips, that's what the P in PSV stands for, who had contacts with Brazilian clubs. And they were sponsored by Nike, who also sponsored Ronaldo. And they'd had the sort of Romario connection. So what actually happened was at the World Cup in '94, when the Brazilian team were training and they had their camp, and Ajax couldn't make further contact with Ronaldo, but PSV could get through because they had the Romario connection. So it kind of ended up where Van Gaal, and he said it very openly as well, that he really wanted Ronaldo, and Ajax couldn't deliver. But obviously at the time, it was not like Van Gaal being Van Gaal was going to come out and say, oh, we didn't get our first target. So he came out and said at the start of the season, PSV have Ronaldo, Ajax have Kluivert. And Kluivert at this point is a 17-year-old boy who is playing his first professional season. But, it could have gone horribly wrong. But he starts him in the Super Cup. So Ronald de Boer was the striker before that, was the sort of first choice striker, drops him into midfield, Kluivert starts up front and he scores, and he goes on to have this amazing breakout season, and he was actually really, really gutted not to start the final that de Boer was starting again. And he kind of, I think Bogard mentions that on the bench, he was constantly saying that, you're going to go on and score, you're going to go on and score. And he said that, I kind of had that feeling as well, that if I had the chance to go on, I'm going to go and score. And yeah, he comes on and just completely turns it. It's funny as well, because for the actual goal, when he receives, I'm pretty sure we'll go into a bit more detail in a bit, but when he receives the ball from Rijkaard, by Van Gaal's training methods and the sort of drills they use on the training ground, he's supposed to have played it back to Rijkaard, who takes the shot. But then he sees this window of opportunity where I think it's Boban on his back who then sort of fumbles and falls, and then Baresi in front of him, and he kind of sees his window and he just toe pokes it. And I think even till date, the sort of players from that time laugh about it, saying it was that toepuntje, it was the toe poke that won it for Ajax that night.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about the. I mean, we've already talked about that, Jonathan. But I said it was a bit of a scrappy goal, but you took umbrage with that.
Well, yeah, because I think his strength to hold. I think it's actually Albertini on his back, but it's his strength to hold him off is remarkable, especially in a kid. He turned 18 by this stage, I think, but still a very young kid.
Yeah, he was a month. I think a month. It was a month before his 19th birthday.
Right. Yeah. So he holds off. Holds off Albertini, so to have the strength to do that, to have the sort of the body shape to do that, and then to have that sort of the wit, the ability to improvise and realise there's this window of opportunity you talk about, that if he just sort of pokes it, Rossi's not fully set and it might beat him, which is exactly what happens. It beats him not because it's a great shot, because it's a quick shot, it's an early shot, and Rossi's not quite set. And before you've sort of worked out what's happened, Albertini's on the ground, the ball's in the back of the net, and you still think, what just happened? And that's one of the geniuses of goal scorers, to just have that sort of ability to find a way, and it might not be what you trained, it might not be anything you've ever done before, but to find a way to get the ball into the back of the net.
Yeah, well, one of them won them the game, and I think for the purist, for the neutral, it was an amazing moment. It was.
Well, the other thing that then happens, which I think sort of, given the sort of caution and conservatism that Van Gaal sort of had become notorious for in Dutch circles, Ajax have another great chance where Rossi makes a really good save with Blind in the box. What are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I know what you mean. This is not the point you're making, but he should have scored.
Well, he should have scored, but also,
I mean, it's a great save.
What's your centre back doing in the opposition box with seconds to go in the Champions League final when you 1-0 up?
Also, the player who had the ball could have held it in the corner. Now, they then subsequently go on to do that and see the game out. But you're absolutely right. If Milan had found an equaliser from somewhere, my goodness, it
was your David Ginola moment.
Exactly, yeah, it could have been like that. But fortunately for them, Priya, it wasn't, and Ajax won the Champions League that year. And the sort of the legacy of that team, that we've touched upon many times, has been huge, Priya, from that winning side.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not really a coincidence that three of that backline eventually go to Barcelona. Obviously, Rijkaard as coach, not a player. And it's also a shame, because I actually think that was the highlight for most of them. So if you see someone like Jari Litmanen, who I actually can't talk enough about, because it was his work throughout the season that got them to the final. He didn't have a great final, but without him, there's no way Ajax get that far.
But we should say that they got to the final the following year.
They did, yeah.
Only beaten on penalties. So but of course, but this was the season they won it.
But yeah, and but he never goes on to reach that sort of high in his career again. But I think the legacy mostly comes from Van Gaal, I think, kind of importing his ideas to Barcelona, and then there you see sort of coaches start to pick it up. I mean, coaches as we recognise now, like Guardiola and Mourinho, so on. But I think they really set a blueprint almost for modern football, in that it kind of proved that you don't need experience necessarily. If you've got a team that's well drilled and is committed to what they're doing and knows the system inside out, you could get past the sort of experience and sort of you need older players and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point, Jonathan. I mean, Van Gaal, yeah, if you think about the legacy of this side, he's the one who goes on and has an extraordinary managerial career.
Of the side, so if you include Van Gaal, 4 of them go on to manage the Netherlands national team.
Yeah.
Van der Sar is
There's a bit of a dispute about the last one, Jonathan. I'm not quite convinced yet.
Well, he's technically in charge. Frank de Boer does have a job.
Oh God.
Factually correct.
Van der Sar, CEO of Ajax and very sort of vocal in the ECA. Davids goes on to manage Barnet.
Overmars is a technical director at Ajax at the moment.
Yeah, so I mean,
Carno won the FA Cup with Portsmouth.
So they all go on, a large proportion go on to kind of very senior jobs. So it's that sort of. I've written the book on Barcelona in the late 90s about the influence that they have. But half of that team is this team. So this team is the sort of the seed of that, and Van Gaal clearly is the bridge between the two.
Yeah, and just a quick mention, if I may, Rijkaard and his managerial career, but turning the fortunes of Barcelona around. You can't really, underplay his importance in the recent story of Barcelona. Yeah,
Barcelona, the team that the Dutch Antilles could have been.
Yeah. I think we'll leave it there. Priya, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this. Thank you very much for coming on the pod.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, for more stories like that, do check out theblizzard.co.uk. But myself and Jonathan will be back next week with another great game from the history of football. Until then, see you next time.